over its body other than the face itself.
There are, in fact, 4 different types of, what we think of as Sasquatch or Bigfoot.
Very wide, pronounced nose. There was also a very ominous odor.
Phase 1 is to identify opportunities. I walked into a small clearing in less than 10-15 feet away from this enormous creature, and it scared the living hell out of me. Phase 2 is conducting investigations both of witnesses and locations. The size of the thing, it was 4 or 5 feet across the shoulders. Phase 3 is profiling research areas, what's there, how they move, feeding, things like that. About 8 feet tall, I guessed around 800 pounds. It was massive. I had no idea that anything like that existed. Phase 4 is create an intercept plan. I decided to shoot in the air to see if maybe it would scare it off. Phase 5 is the intercept and resolve the issue phase. It didn't do anything, didn't react, and then I heard a noise from my right rear, and from out behind some brush come another one, walked over by the first one. That's when I decided to do what the dog did. I took off running. Welcome to Witness of the Unknown. Hello everyone. I'm talking today with my good friend and Brian, and who's also a screenwriter. Brian, how you doing, buddy?
Good. How's it going, everybody?
What we thought we'd talk about today was the subject of hoaxing. And I know right now, and you had messaged me about the whole Todd Standing, the film thing he has on Netflix. And I know I haven't seen it, so I can't really comment too much on it. But if he's still using the same old pictures that he had, a few years back, I know from having seen one of these creatures, or actually 3 of them, that those things look absolutely nothing. Not only do they not look real, they don't look like actual Sasquatches.
Yeah. No, they don't. It's pretty ridiculous. But again, he has his own following, so I guess that's what they believe him. So whatever, but it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of the same arguments came around the first time he put those pictures out. I know I saw them on Facebook, and we talked about, and this was talked about quite a bit before when he first came out. There was somebody who did a really nice kind of an image showing his supposed creatures, and then on the far right, after when these it morphed into his face. And actually, when you look at the first picture and then the picture of his face, not the morphing shots in between, but you can really see that fits his face. I mean, it's almost like he put this hair and stuff on his own face, and that's the picture he took.
Well, that's exactly what I think the Wall Street Journal did an article on this, and they basically said that they actually compared his face to the mask, and they said this guy is a complete moron because he put his own face on the mask that he did the hoax on. So it's hilarious.
Yeah, it's like somebody wasn't going to figure that out.
Yeah. But well, again, we won't go into details about some of the hoaxers that are out there, but they all they say, this is such a great evidence. This is such great evidence, and blah blah blah. But we'll leave that.
Right. I mean, there's and the difference being is things like people can say, well, the Patterson film was fake, but it stood 50 years of scrutiny and no one has yet proven that it's fake. as opposed to these other ones. And now there were three, as we mentioned before we came on the air. There were three specific incidents and people that I did want to bring up, and we could use because they have very different, I think, motivations and as to why they hoaxed. And people always ask me when it comes up to hoaxes, why would people do that? And there's a few different reasons, depending on the person, of course. But the first one goes back to the very beginning of this whole subject, when it got into the public mind after 1958, when the Eureka Times newspaper in Northern California started putting articles out about what was being found around heavy equipment in Bluff Creek. And that's where, of course, the term Bigfoot was coined. And I want to say it was Betty Allen. I'd have to go back and check, but I think she was the reporter who did an article for the Eureka Times. She wasn't a full-time reporter, but she did feature articles. She went out, and like I said, don't hold me to this, I'm pretty sure it was her, but the reporter went out with, the guys who were finding the stuff, and I don't know why his name escapes me at the moment. I just got back from shopping, so my mind is still kind of in that mode. Jerry Crew, the dozer operator who would find footprints in the morning around his equipment. She was with him one afternoon, and he made the comment, "That fella sure has big feet." Well, she coined the term Bigfoot, and that's the term that's been popularly used ever since then. So Wallace was one of the main contractors in that area at the time. And when I talked to Al Hodgson, when I did my interview with him back in 2005, Al made the comment to me, because Ray Wallace tried to claim that he made all the footprints in the area. The many, many thousands of footprints. And I mean many thousands. He said Wallace, number one, would have been too busy going, because he had his crews in there working, then he would be out trying to get more contracts, to get more work, trying to make his living. So he wasn't in the area very often. And I know from talking to, Bob Titmus and Renee DeHanan and John Green and all those kind of guys, that Wallace in the very beginning was very enthusiastic about what was being found in the area. He was very heavily involved and out looking. And, with Titmus, they did a volumetric test on some of the scat that was found and determined that it was the same amount that a 1,200-pound horse would excrete. So he was very involved. And I think what happened with Wallace was when all the principals who got to be famous moved in and kind of took over the investigation in that area, I think he kind of got pushed out. And personally, I think he was a little unhappy about all of that, because he was the guy on the scene. It was his crews in there. He was finding all this stuff. And then I think that was his motivation for making the claim that his wooden feet made the footprints. But if you go back and look at the footprint cast of the 6 different Sasquatches that were identified during that decade from 1958 to 67, none of those prints match any of his wooden feet. And I actually saw a display with some of his wooden feet near Mount St. Helens back in the 80s, and they were actually nowhere near the size or anything of the actual prints that were found. They were actually very small, and the details looked nothing like the prints that were found. So that was the first case. The second case was Ivan Marks in the late 60s, early 70s in northeastern Washington. In the beginning, Marks had found some things. He actually cast a couple of very interesting handprints. And I think what he found in the very beginning was probably legitimate. The handprints, other footprints, things like that. He was with Renee DeHanan when they found the Bossberg Cripplefoot tracks in northeastern Washington. And then there was well over 1,000 prints they found. But and he wasn't alone. Of course, him and DeHanan, there were some other people involved there with that line of tracks. I think over time, Marks felt the pressure to produce. And what happens in the subject of Bigfoot, if you don't keep things going, the old squeaky wheel gets the grease terminology, then the public kind of forgets who you are. People in the subject get passed by very quickly. So by the late 80s, and this was about the time I was involved with Knott's Berry Farm doing the project with Bigfoot Rapids, Marks came out with this film, and everybody was lauding it as the best proof ever, better than the Patterson film, on and on and on. Well, it's a ridiculous film. And it was obviously somebody in a suit, and as soon as he was exposed, you know, it was all history. Nothing was left.
Yeah.
And I think, again, you know, with the first case, you know, with Wallace, we have the fact that I think he felt left out, so he kind of got angry, and that's why he claimed faking. Marks, on the other hand, felt the pressure to produce or be lost. And then thirdly, we have Rick Dyer, more recently.
Yeah.
His, I think, was purely financial.
Yeah.
I was told that he made well over $100,000. He had an expensive truck and a bunch of other equipment, a real expensive trailer. Lost everything when everybody figured out that it was a fake. But again, everybody was on the gravy train saying, yeah, this is real, this is amazing, on and on and on, and it was crap.
Yeah.
So I think those are three really great examples of hoaxing and the various reasons behind why, or the motivations behind why people would hoax.
Yeah. I mean, it is like really interesting about how, like, you know, like all these people, I guess they can, like, I guess, ride on the gravy train.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just for attention. I mean, people like Tom Biscardi.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I don't know what to think about Biscardi personally. Personally, I'd rather not think about people like that.
Yeah.
He and a number of others, and I want to say Dyer was involved in that too. The Georgia Bigfoot in a freezer hoax, where it turned out it was a gorilla suit in the freezer.
Yeah.
You know, and it was this big attention kind of a thing, and it turned out to be, again, nothing. So, I mean, there are some people that are just, they're greedy, they want attention, or they're just plain crazy.
Yeah. But like, how much do you think that it's about money? Like, do you think that, like, all these people are just out there for money, or are they like, I mean, are they like somehow like legitimate, like, researchers, or?
I think years ago it wasn't so much about money. I mean, I think it was always there, but I'll tell you, when I did the Knott's Berry Farm project, this was in the spring of 1988, I was approached by them and agreed to provide, you know, casts and things like that, just props. For what they had was they created it was supposed, at the time, this was before Splash Mountain, and I think I heard somewhere during that time that Splash Mountain was going to be their response to what Knott's was doing with Bigfoot Rapids. At the time, Bigfoot Rapids was billed as the biggest man-made whitewater rapids, and it was a ride. You got on a big raft and you floated down through this thing, and it was kind of cool. And in the middle of that, well, they created the fauna and flora from the Pacific Northwest, and what they wanted to include the Sasquatch as part of that, you know, the fauna. So what they had is a little building that was a ranger station in the middle, and they were going to have actually a person there wearing some kind of uniform answering questions. Well, what they wanted from me was a display of Bigfoot artifacts or evidence. And I didn't have a great deal of stuff at the time, so I contacted John Green and Renee DeHinden and Grover Krantz and Bob Titmus and all these people that I knew, and Knott's paid me, at the time it was $3,000. I used about half that money to purchase copies of casts and things from those people, and books and newspaper articles and all kinds of things that were interesting. And while visiting John Green during that time, he told me, we were sitting around having lunch, and we were talking, and he says, you know what? He says, nobody's ever been paid for doing anything. He says, you're the first person to ever be paid to do anything with the subject of Bigfoot. So I thought, wow, I said, I don't know why they picked me. And Green says, it's because you were cheap. Nobody knows who you are yet. But it was revealing. And because nobody was really out. Now, it wasn't true that nobody had been paid, because, you know, the Patterson film had made some money. Mrs. Patterson told me she made around $2,500 every time the film was viewed. And Renee DeHinden owned the still rights, so he told me he made about $600 every time one of the still photos was used in a magazine or something. So, I mean, but it was very small, very low-key. Nobody was really out to make a buck. And, of course, Green made money in his books. But, again, it wasn't really in the public venue at that point that anybody was making any money. So money wasn't really a concern in the beginning, but as time went by, more and more people saw the possibility of making a buck off this, and I think today that's a huge thing. There are podcasts out there, that are raking in huge money. There are other venues that are making a lot of money, TV shows, things like that. And none of those are really very good, but it's kind of what there is, and the public who's interested in the subject kind of soaks it up.
Yeah. Now about the Patterson film, do you think that like eventually people are going to kind of see that for what it is, or is it always going to be kind of a hoax thing?
I think until the creatures are actually proven to be real, and when people look, and eventually it'll happen, there'll be a lot more film footage of the creatures. In fact, it's one of my plans is to go out and do, like I've said before, I want to make National Geographic quality film of these creatures in their environment. And if I can do that, people will be able to compare what Patterson filmed with those films and make a decision whether it's the real thing or not. And I think they will say, oh yeah, these guys did this 50, 60 years ago, and it took all this time.
Yeah. Because I've always thought that film, the footage, it might be a little bit skeptical, but there's a shot there where you see Patty's foot, she lifts up her foot, and you could see her digits.
You can
there.
See the bottom of the foot.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I've always thought it's probably real.
And what's interesting, and I've showed you the picture that I have. And folks, it's a picture. I keep saying this. It's going to be in my next book that I'm working on currently. Actually, the color photograph is the cover of the book, but exactly the same thing is the creature's moving away, and it's a clear daylight picture. There's nothing blurry about that picture. You can clearly see the bottom of the right foot, and it's very similar to what you see in the Patterson film. The only difference being is the Patterson Sasquatch is walking. The creature in the picture that I have appears to be running.
Well,
so the toes are a little bit more splayed, but it's the same foot.
Yeah, exactly. And also, Will, let me ask your opinion about this. So what I've heard is that Patty, she was probably walking away from her child at that time, that's the reason why she's walking away. There would be no reason why she would be walking away in that footage like that unless she was protecting her child, and that they think that her child was actually behind her.
I think I was the first one to actually bring that up many years ago to Renee DeHinden. I was at his house, and this is many years ago. And I was a young guy with lots of questions, and we were sitting around. He pulled the slides out, and we were looking at the slides. Each individual slide. He had slides made from each frame in the film. Beautiful pictures. When they're on slide, they come up. He had them. Showed them on a wall, and they were I think 4 feet across and 3 feet high, something like that. Beautiful detail, and of course going to the Bluff Creek film site. I had even more questions. After the first time I went there, I asked Renee, I said, well, now the guys were coming from this direction. I said, the creature was over here, and I said, it doesn't make any sense to me when normally you come up on any kind of wildlife, they take the quickest route away from any approaching danger, which is usually us. And I said, that creature could have turned to its left and very quickly, in a matter of a couple seconds, vanished, and you would never seen it again. Then their story would have been just another Bigfoot story. But it chose to turn to its right, and it walked across that open creek bed. And partway across, it actually turned around to look at those two guys like it was making sure they were still there. And it wasn't running. It was walking at, I suppose for a Sasquatch would be a quick, well, for us it's a quick pace, but for the Sasquatch, when you look at it, it doesn't appear to be in a real hurry as it's leaving. That's my opinion. And it turns to look like, are they still there? Making sure that they're not going. And I asked Renee, I said, well, did you guys ever consider that maybe there was a young one there?
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
only humans who are not, human females that are not breastfeeding, don't have, of all primates, don't have breasts full of milk, typically, in the wild. We're the only exception to that. So I thought to myself, well, when you look at the Sasquatch, obviously it's got, the breasts are full of milk because they're sticking out there. And I thought to myself, well, you start adding up these little details, and that was the first thing that came to my mind. Well, a few years back, before my now deceased friend Bobby Short, Bobby and I used to have a lot of real interesting conversations. We had a mutual friend in Renee DeHinden. She was his nurse when he passed away. So we would always chat about DeHindenisms, because Renee had some very particular things that he would say or do, and they were always very humorous. We got a good laugh out of Renee. And Renee used to get a good laugh out of Renee, too, because he knew he was being funny when he'd do these things. So, her and I talked about that, and she says, that's a really good point. She says, and something, and I want to say it was Patterson, who had gone in there the previous summer, because he had been in the area a few times along with the rest of those guys, and he was, good friends with John Green, and had cast some prints. And it was either him or Bob Titmus. I can't remember offhand which one it was, but one of those guys was in there. And of the casts they got, and this is only a couple hundred yards downstream from the film site, they cast the tracks of a young Sasquatch, a juvenile. So again, it brings back my thinking, was there a young one there? And it didn't just walk away kind of casually and watch them at one point. When it got out of sight, and of course, they did all their stuff, checking the tracks and depth and stuff like that. They ran it into Willow Creek, that's about 45-minute drive from there. Talked to Al Hodgson. They mailed the film off to get it developed, and they went back up there and they cast the tracks, things like that, and then left the site. The next week or so, about 10 days later, Bob Titmus went there, and he tracked the creature and made a bunch of casts himself from that line of prints. And he said when he followed that line up the hill, it had stopped in a place and stayed where there were some ferns and things like that, a fairly concealed position, for quite some time, he said, by the condition of the vegetation there, and watched them. Well, I don't know. To me, normally Sasquatches, when they encounter people, they take off, they don't hang around. There had to be a reason why it hung around. It went the direction it shouldn't have. It went in a manner like it was making sure they were still there, and it didn't get out of sight. It stayed within visual contact of those two men, almost like it was making sure they didn't go somewhere else. So,
Yeah.
You can't say for certainty because nobody looked, but I have to wonder if there wasn't a young one nearby.
Well, again, yeah, absolutely. And Will, this is also the same thing that you did with the gold hammer case, where, yeah. So like the researchers came in and they found something, but then like you found something else.
Yeah, you have to think. Excuse me. You have to think a little bit more in detail, and like we talked about the previous time with the gold hammer case. I knew that when I saw it on the, I sit down that morning I went up to get the morning newspaper. I sat down on the front steps because it was so nice out that morning. This would have been about the 10th of June, 1989. And I looked at the front page of the paper. It was folded in half. I flip it over to the bottom of the front page, and I see this big article, Family Encounter Sasquatch or something like that. And it had their address on it. And I thought to myself, oh, good Lord, they put their house address on there. There's going to be 1 million people up there. And I thought, well, I'm going to go talk to him anyway, just because. So I drove out there, and I introduced myself to the family and asked them if I could talk to them about what had happened. And they said, sure, come on in. So we went in the house, and I said, I'll bet there were quite a few people here before me, weren't there? And they said, oh, yeah, there were 3 different groups of so-called investigators. They said one was even Claimed he was a biologist from Seattle. And I said, well, what did they ask? What they do? They said, well, of course, they all collected their story. They went out and looked for footprints, for Bigfoot droppings and hair, and then they left. So I said, okay. I had them, can you tell me about what happened? So they related the story, and I'm thinking about this, and it was fascinating to me, the behavior of the Sasquatch. Young Nick, who was 16 at the time, they were in the house, and they heard a commotion. Brenda, the lady of the house, was going to go out and ride her horse. She had it tied up to a fence post in the corral. So they heard it making a bunch of noise, and she didn't want the horse to get injured with the rope around its hooves or anything, so she asked young Nick to go out and check on the horse, make sure it was okay. So he slips on some rubber boots and he goes out there, and he sees what he thinks is a person. Now, if you visualize the back of their house, I think they had 13 acres, and there was this tree line on the left edge of their property, and then their property was mostly open fields. And this quote-unquote person was walking away 100 yards or so along the tree line in the open field away from the house. So Nick goes running out there, ready to give this person hell about what they're doing on their property. Now, there's no houses or anything down there. They're quite a ways away, any houses. There's no reason for anybody to be down there. So Nick gets fairly close to this moving object, and he slips on a tree limb that's buried in the field grass and makes a bunch of noise. So this thing turns around. Now, he's relatively close. He's only about 20 or 30 feet from it. And by this time, of course, Nick sees it's not a person. And he said the thing kind of reared its head back and its eyes got big. He said it kind of leaned forward with its eyes big, looking at him in almost astonishment. He said then it put its hands out at about a 45-degree angle from its body, palms facing him, and it starts walking towards him. Well, of course, he sees this big hairy monster coming after him, and he gets up and makes a beeline straight for the house. Yeah. And then when they look again, it's already turned around and it's heading back in the same direction. So he puts on a little better pair of boots, ones that can get a little more traction with, and he goes running back after it. He wants a closer look. The thing hears him coming again, and this time it turns around and actually starts coming after him. It's not hurting him anymore, but it didn't try to catch him. He ran back up to where their outbuildings were. He climbed up on one of the little outbuildings, and it sort of kept him there treed for a while, making sure he wasn't going to come back. So then, after a time, it turned around and it resumed the very same course it was on the very first time. And I said, well, that's very interesting. Did any of you guys go down there? Did any of these so-called investigators go down there and look where it was going? No, nobody went down there. Nobody was interested. I said, can I go look? Sure, we'll take you down there. So we went down, and Nick showed me where he fell down and where the thing was and all this stuff. And there was a small intermediary creek, which is, only has water part of the year, in the middle of their field. It's very similar to the place I grew up. We had one kind of like that. So we went up into the upper fields, and there was this old cottonwood tree, fairly big one, that had fallen over, probably in a windstorm. And under the root rod was sticking up, and at the base, from the tree trunk down to the base of the roots that were sticking up, there was what was a dried up pond, again an intermediary type thing that's only full of water in the wintertime, and it dries up in the summer. So in the bottom of that was a lot of dirt. There was grass covering the rest of the field, but there was dirt here, and under this, and there was probably about 4 feet or so between the base of the trunk of the tree and the ground, were all these footprints in this dirt. And they were juvenile Sasquatch tracks, a lot of them. And there were 2 different sets. There was a 12-inch set and a 9-inch set. And I said, well, here's the reason this individual was chasing you away. It was keeping you away from the young ones that were hidden here. And I said, keep your eyes open. There's probably a female in the area also.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And about a month later, I get this call when I'm in bed at night. And they said, Will, you got to get out of here right now. And I'm kind of, groggy and saying, well, what's going on? What's happened? And they said, and they were just beside themselves, excited. They said, we're looking out the kitchen window. They had this big, like a street light in their yard. And this thing was standing underneath this light right at the edge of their yard, and it was kind of a gray color. They gave me a perfect description, and when I got there were 16-inch tracks in the flower beds, and it was very interesting. I mean, we knew there were at least 4 of them. So with a little thinking about behavior and a little further investigation, you should be able to find more evidence.
Yeah. Hey. Well, this is totally, I guess, irrelevant to that. But just in your experience, like, are most of these creatures like red color, or are they like brown color or white color, or?
The most prominent color early on that was reported was the cinnamon brown color. I guess you'd equate that to kind of like an orangutan color. That seemed to be, when you look at John Green's books, that seemed to be the most prominent. And when I talked to Green and Hendon, they said most of the people they talked to, and even myself, I interview people today that will give that color. But if you look also in the stories Green had in his books, there was black, there was gray, there were all the same colors that we get today. But what it appears is, as they're younger, probably from the time of birth up to adulthood, they seem to be jet black, and then seem to change color. And even as they get older, will continue to change color. And I don't think that's uncharacteristic of a primate. I mean, heaven knows people do that in a way. I mean, we start out as we age, we lose our hair color, but that seems to be what's going on. A lot of times the reddish brown or brown seems to be predominant, but also black does too. It's the white or gray ones are kind of the minority. They're not as many, but black and brown, or this reddish brown, seem to be the biggest colors that we get. And sometimes they're mixed, which indicates that changing of color.
Yeah. It's just very interesting about how, well, these creatures change, and they evolve and everything, and
then we have to throw the monkey wrench in there of there being more than one type.
Right, exactly, because there's 4 types, right? There's 4,
and maybe even a 5th type. And sometimes it depends on. I mean, there's geographical barriers, just like they were with human beings, where you get different racial groups, where you have a separate breeding population that develops its own characteristics, and they don't mix their genes with outside groups. And it seems to be the same thing with these creatures.
Yeah. Because, like, what are the type that's in Florida? Like, I think it's type 2 or
I think it's type 2. There's a lot of questions that I still have from my sources when it comes to nailing down, a lot of the characteristics. Now, basically, there are 2 main groupings, and each of those main groupings or species have subgroups. So and largely it seems to be one of the main features is the dentition is different from one species group to the other species group, and that's the large canines. The one type has those, the other type doesn't. So that kind of seems to be the major distinguishing feature between the 2 groups.
Yeah, because I don't like here in Florida that they say like, oh, well, there's the swamp ape. They call it the swamp ape, but
sure.
I don't even know what type that is, but
it's probably a type 2. It could even be its own variation, but like I say, I have to clarify that I am going to do a book on the types. But I'm actually going to sit down with some of my sources because they don't want to talk over any kind of electronic media. and I know there's something to that because, I know because of my own family situation that, police and other agencies do occasionally monitor phone calls and things like that. So if they can do it, we know the folks upstairs can do it too. And I can understand my sources not wanting to talk about details through any kind of media, and they'd rather do it in person. So
yeah. Well, listen, hey, Will, it's been great to talk to you, and I think that we kind of established a good a point about the hoaxers out there, and right. How they give this whole subject a bad reputation,
right?
And
I think what people should do is, if they're going to look at anything with this subject, keep a skeptical mind and really, look at it from all different points of view before making any kind of a decision about something.
Yeah, exactly. But it's been great to talk to you. Like, and again, Happy New Year.
Great talking to you too, Brian, and Happy New Year to you too, buddy.
And hopefully, we'll talk more about our projects on the side.
Absolutely.
But, yeah. So we'll talk more about that like after this podcast. But great talking to you, and Happy New Year. And I hope that this is going to be a great New Year for all of us. So.
I'm looking forward to it. I think we have some big projects ahead. I know we were doing this last year as well, talking about big projects, and we did with the Jabbing Research Group. Has grown phenomenally around the world. So that was a great start. We have a lot more to do, plus other projects. So I'm looking forward to all that.
All right. So Happy New Year to everybody.
All right. Thank you, buddy.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone, for joining me this week. Be sure to tune in again next week as we explore another account from a witness of the unknown.